Power can twist the best intentions. You see it in the headlines, in boardrooms, where influence seems to corrode character. But there's a counter-example in history. 2,000 years ago, Roman emperors had near absolute authority, a position ripe for corruption. Yet some, like Marcus Aurelius, ruled with a noted restraint. It baffles modern observers. He wrote in his private meditations that the soul must arm itself with certain doctrines, not for aggression, as an unshakable defense. This wasn't a vague ideal. It was a precise, hidden framework, the specific Stoic disciplines that allowed the most powerful men in the ancient world to govern empires without becoming monsters. Moving from the inner citadel of the mind to the outer duties of leadership, a system under extreme pressure. How did they resist the intoxication of unlimited control? And what their private struggles can teach us about wielding any amount of influence well today. Before a Roman emperor could rule an empire, he had to rule himself. That was the idea. The Stoics called it the inner citadel. It wasn't a real fortress, it was a psychological one, a space inside the mind where reason sat on the throne, not emotion. For a leader surrounded by the noise of power that was the real defense, the Stoics drew a line. Some things are in our control, our judgments, our impulses, our desires. And some things are not, our reputation, our wealth, what other people do. True sovereignty, they said, is only in that first category. A corrupt leader gets it backwards. They try to control everything outside while losing control of everything inside. The philosopher Epictetus, his teachings were studied by emperors. He put it plainly. What's up to us is our faculty of choice. Everything else is not up to us. That was the architecture they built. Their power wasn't in commanding legions. It was in commanding their own character, and it was a daily practice. You see it in Marcus Aurelius. Publicly, he was the most powerful man on earth. His face on coins, his word was law. Privately, he was writing notes to himself. In his meditations, he's always reinforcing that inner sovereignty. He tells himself to strip away the title of emperor, to see himself as a man, to examine his impulses, to check his anger, to return to reason. That journal was his training ground. It's how he fortified the inner citadel against the two big corrupting forces. Flattery and fear. Courtiers would tell him he was a god. His own notes told him he was a mortal with a job to do. That discipline created a buffer. It let external events crash against the walls of his character without collapsing the core. So, what's one aspect of your own character you'd call your inner citadel? That non-negotiable line you wouldn't cross, no matter the pressure or the reward. Identify that, because that's where your true sovereignty begins. How do you keep pride from taking over when everything around you is bowing down? The Roman Stoics had an answer for that. It was a viewpoint, not a law. They called it the view from above. It was a mental exercise, a deliberate shift in perspective. A leader would close their eyes and zoom out in their mind. First, rising above their own palace, watching the marble halls get smaller. Then above the city itself, Rome becoming just a tiny grid below. Higher still, until the whole empire was just a patch on the Earth's curve. And finally, out into the cosmos, seeing the entire world as a single speck in an endless sea of stars. That was the cosmic perspective. Its purpose was to vaporize arrogance. Because when you see your life from that vantage point, your power, your legacy, it becomes almost impossible to take yourself too seriously. Marcus Aurelius practiced this constantly. In his private writings, he's always reminding himself to look down from above. He visualizes the royal court, the armies, the markets. From a great height, he writes, how many quarrels look petty? How many triumphs look small? He sees the endless parade of human lives, generations rising and falling. In one passage, He describes looking down and seeing the Mediterranean as nothing more than a puddle. His entire known world just a damp spot on the floor of the universe. This wasn't about feeling insignificant in a bad way. It was about finding freedom. If your personal glory is a cosmic speck, then what truly matters, not your statue, not your title. What matters is the quality of your character, the integrity of your actions, in your brief moment on that speck. This mindset connected to another Stoic practice, remembering your mortality. The phrase was Memento Mori, remember you must die. For an emperor, this was the ultimate equalizer. It didn't matter if you wore a purple robe or rags. The same fate awaited everyone. That remembrance was a powerful check against cruelty. Why inflict suffering when you and the person before you are both just temporary visitors here? It fostered a deep humility and a focus on duty. The duty wasn't to build a monument to yourself, but to serve the common good during your short watch. So you can bring this into your own life. Take a current stressor, a conflict, a source of pride or anxiety. In your mind, zoom out. See it from the end of the week, the end of the year, a decade from now. Then keep going. See it from the scale of a century, a millennium, from the edge of the solar system, and watch how its weight changes. Often, what feels like an immense pressure shrinks to a manageable detail within the vast story of your life. This perspective doesn't make your responsibilities disappear. It just strips away the ego's inflation, so you can address them with clearer eyes and a calmer heart. When the plague hit Rome, or when his legions turned against him, Marcus Aurelius didn't see misfortune. He saw material for his virtue. That's the core of a Stoic practice, Amor Fati. Love of one's fate, it's not passive, it's an active embrace, an artistic embrace really of every event, especially the hard ones, treating them as the raw material you were meant to work with. For an emperor, for someone with absolute power, this idea was a shield, a psychological shield. It guarded against the most corrosive emotions, resentment. Paranoia, because corruption, it doesn't only come from greed. Often, it comes from a deep resistance to reality, a feeling that the world has wronged you. And that feeling, that sense of being wronged, becomes an entitlement to lash out. The Stoics viewed the universe as rational, interconnected. A whole, everything that happens, they reasoned, is a thread in a vast tapestry, and to reject one thread, to pull against it, is to reject the fabric of existence itself. Epictetus said it directly. He was a former slave, and his words guided emperors. He said, "Do not seek for events to happen as you wish. Wish for events to happen as they do. And your life will go well. That is the will of nature." Marcus Aurelius wrote something similar in his private journal. He wrote that an obstacle to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Now apply it to the throne room. Imagine a trusted advisor betrays the emperor, leaks secrets for personal gain. The typical response, the corrupted response, is visceral, it's personal, it's rage, a thirst for vengeance, and then a spiral into suspicion of everyone else. The Stoic emperor, practicing Amor Fati, would take a breath, a deliberate breath, and perform a mental pivot. This betrayal is not a personal insult. It is now the material presented to me. It's a test. How will I exercise justice in my response rather than cruelty? How will I demonstrate temperance in my anger? How does this event reveal a weakness in my system, a weakness I can now fortify for the common good? The event itself is neutral. It's the leader's judgment, the leader's action, that defines its ultimate value. This transforms the entire landscape of power. Setbacks are no longer attacks to be avenged. They're puzzles to be solved. They're muscles for your character to strengthen. A failed military campaign becomes a lesson in logistics and in humility. A political rival's smear becomes a practice in patience and in clarity of communication. even personal loss becomes a deepening of compassion for all who experience hardship. The leader stops fighting against reality and starts working with it, channeling every ounce of energy that would have been wasted on resentment into purposeful action. Virtuous action, so bring it down to your own scale. Think of a recent setback, a frustration, a plan that fell apart. Instead of asking why this happened to you, try the reframe. The Amor Fati reframe. Ask yourself, how can this specific event, exactly as it occurred, serve my growth or my duty? What quality does it invite me to strengthen? Resilience, creativity, forgiveness, decisiveness. By accepting the event as your assigned material, you disarm it. You disarm its power to corrupt your mood. Your morals, you begin to see, as the Stoic leaders did, that the very things that seem to block your path are often the path itself. The most dangerous desire for an emperor wasn't for a rival's throne. It was for the wrong thing entirely. The Stoics saw that as the root of corruption. It wasn't the desire for power itself that ruined leaders. It was the desire for things that were fragile. Things outside their ultimate control, endless praise, permanent legacy, total security, boundless wealth. To crave those was to chain your happiness to a wheel that never stopped turning. So they built a discipline around desire itself. They trained to want only what was truly good and truly up to them: virtue, justice, courage, wisdom. That inner reorientation was their ultimate immunization. The philosopher Seneca advised the young Emperor Nero. He wrote about this in his letters. He drew a sharp line. He called things like public office, wealth, and fame preferred indifference. They might have some value, but they weren't true goods. A true good, he argued, could never be used for evil. And since power or wealth could certainly be misused, they couldn't be the ultimate goal. The real goal, the only thing worthy of our deepest desire, was a virtuous character. He wrote that we should measure our life not by the applause we receive, but by the conscience we keep. For a man in Nero's court, surrounded by sycophants, that was a revolutionary idea. Your worth wasn't in how many people chanted your name. It was in the quiet certainty that your actions aligned with reason and the common good. You can see this discipline in action. Leaders who consciously refused the trappings of absolute power. The Emperor Augustus, at the height of his authority, lived in a relatively modest house on the Palatine Hill. He didn't build a colossal palace to overshadow the Senate house. He understood the symbolic power of restraint. More strikingly, consider the Roman general Lucius Quinctius Cincinnatus. The story goes that when Rome faced a crisis, the Senate begged him, a simple farmer, to become absolute dictator. He accepted the power, led the army to victory, and then just 16 days later, he resigned his supreme command and returned to his plow. He desired the completion of his duty, not the permanence of his position. These weren't just acts of humility. They were live demonstrations of the Stoic discipline of desire. The object of their want was the virtuous act itself serving Rome, not the title or the glory that came with it. For a modern leader, or for anyone in a position of influence, this audit is crucial. Which of your current wants are for things outside your control? The desire for a certain outcome in a negotiation, the craving for universal approval from your team, the need for a competitor to fail. When your happiness depends on these external validations, you make yourself vulnerable. You become willing to cut corners, to silence dissent, to make choices that compromise your integrity, just to secure that thing you think you need. The Stoic reframe is to shift the desire inward. Instead of wanting the deal to close, desire to conduct the negotiations with integrity and wisdom. Instead of craving praise, desire to do praiseworthy work. This doesn't guarantee the external result, but it guarantees something far more valuable. It guarantees that no matter the outcome, you remain uncorrupted. You keep your inner citadel intact, so take a quiet moment. Look at one ambition, one goal that feels urgent. Ask yourself, is my desire fixed on an external trophy or on the quality of character I can demonstrate in pursuing it? The answer to that question is the difference between being led by your circumstances and leading from your principles. Absolute power wasn't freedom to do whatever you wanted. For a Stoic leader, it was the absolute duty to do the right thing. That was the discipline of action. It changed the whole purpose of command. It turned it from self-service into something like a sacred stewardship. The emperor's will wasn't his own to indulge. It was a tool to be used for the common welfare, according to the rational nature of the universe. And this wasn't about grand gestures of charity. It was about the daily choice, the deliberate choice to act with justice, courage, temperance as social duties. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this constantly. He repeats a simple phrase in his Meditations: do the work of a human being. He didn't see himself as a god-king. He saw himself as a citizen of a much larger community. He called it the Cosmopolis, the universal city of all rational beings. His empire, Rome, was just one neighborhood in that vast metropolis. His job was to tend to his neighborhood, to care for it the way a good neighbor would, because his true citizenship was to humanity itself. He wrote, "What brings no benefit to the hive brings no benefit to the bee." The emperor was the bee, and every action was judged by its contribution to the health of the entire hive. This philosophy shaped how power was exercised. Take a policy decision like commissioning an aqueduct. A corrupt leader might build it to immortalize his name, route it past his own villas first. The Stoic leader, guided by the discipline of action, would ask different questions. Does this serve the common welfare? Does it bring clean water to the most people, improve public health? Is it built with justice, using public funds responsibly? Is it an act of courage, taking on a long-term project that won't be finished in his own lifetime? The action might look the same. An aqueduct gets built. But the intention behind it, the source of the action, is utterly different. One act stems from vanity, the other from virtue. One seeks to extract benefit from the people. The other seeks to confer benefit upon them. That was the Stoic lens. The Roman Empire wasn't a possession to be plundered. It was a responsibility to be stewarded wisely for the benefit of those living now and those yet to come. You can apply that lens to any sphere of influence you have, in your work, your family, your community. Before your next significant action, pause, perform this simple audit. Is my next move primarily for my benefit or for the common good? This isn't about self-sacrifice to the point of exhaustion. The Stoics were practical. They understood a leader must be well to lead well, but it is about intention. It's about aligning your personal goals with a contribution that extends beyond yourself. When you lead a meeting, is your goal to be heard or to hear and synthesize the best ideas for the team's success? When you make a decision at home, is it for your convenience or for the harmony and growth of the household? This discipline channels energy away from petty politics and personal grievances into constructive, unifying work. It turns the immense weight of authority, whether over an empire or a small project, into a grounding force for good. The corrupting lure of power whispers that you are above the rules. The Stoic discipline of action answers back with quiet firmness that you are here for a reason. Your power is not your privilege, it is your assignment. A messenger arrives with bad news. The first feeling is threat, betrayal, failure. For a Stoic emperor, the first move wasn't to lash out or call the guards. It was to pause, to create a deliberate space between the event and his reaction. That was the discipline of assent. It was their most critical defense against becoming a tyrant. Because tyranny is often just a series of unchecked, reactive judgments, made in fear or anger, and then enforced with absolute power. The Stoics saw that our suffering, our worst mistakes, they don't come from the events themselves. They come from the judgments we stamp onto those events the instant they arrive. Epictetus, his lessons were studied in the palace, he put it clearly. He said, "People are not disturbed by things, but by the views they take of them." For a ruler, this was operational wisdom. A provincial governor reports a rebellion. The first impression screams disloyalty, a personal insult, a crisis to be crushed with overwhelming force. The disciplined leader practicing assent would catch that initial judgment before it could take root. He would interrogate it. Is this truly an evil, or is it an inconvenience? Is this a malicious act against me, or is it a complex situation, born of hardship or miscommunication or failed policy? By pausing to question the impression, he created room for a different response, one based on inquiry, not instinct. Consider a leader receiving sharp criticism from an advisor in a council meeting. The immediate impression is one of disrespect, a challenge to authority. The corrupted, reactive path is to silence the critic, to see them as an enemy to be removed. The Stoic path, guided by assent, is to pause, to examine the judgment. Is this person attacking me, or are they attacking a problem? Could their dissent, however blunt, contain a piece of truth? Something vital for the empire's health. That pause transforms the entire dynamic. It turns a perceived threat into a potential source of intelligence. It allows the leader to separate the message from the manner of its delivery. Marcus Aurelius modeled this constantly. In his private notes, he reminds himself to strip away the story he's telling himself about events. He writes, "Don't let the force of the impression carry you away. Say to it, wait a moment, let me see who you are and what you represent. Let me test you." This mental protocol prevented the slow poison of paranoia. It stopped the cascade, where one betrayal leads to suspicion of all advisors, which leads to isolation, which leads to even poorer decisions. Made in an echo chamber of fear, the discipline of assent was the governor on the engine of power. It ensured that raw impulse was never translated directly into law or command. So bring this into your own realm of influence. The next time a piece of news, an email, a comment from a colleague triggers a strong surge of frustration or anger, practice that imperial pause. Before the reaction solidifies into words or action, create that space. Ask yourself the two questions that guard the gates of judgment. What is my initial interpretation of this event? And is that interpretation absolutely, necessarily true? Often, you'll find that your first impression is just one possible narrative, and rarely the most useful one. By withholding your assent from that initial, heated story, you reclaim the authority to choose a wiser response, more just and ultimately more powerful. This small space between event and reaction is where your true sovereignty lies. It's where the path of the corrupt ruler diverges from that of the wise steward. To hold power securely, the Stoic leader would first imagine losing it. That sounds like a contradiction, but it was their main defense. They called it Premeditatio Malorum, the premeditation of evils. It wasn't dwelling on doom. It was a calm, deliberate look at every possible setback. The goal was to take the shock out of those future fears, to strip them of their power in the present. It was a kind of psychological inoculation. By giving the mind a controlled dose of adversity ahead of time, they built an immunity against the panic that leads to desperate, unethical choices. Seneca wrote about this. He was the philosopher who advised an emperor. He told his readers to regularly think about exile, poverty, illness, even the loss of life itself. His goal wasn't to spread fear, it was to dismantle it. He argued that by facing these possibilities in our imagination, we come to a realization: none of these events are the true evil. The only real evil, he taught, is to lose our virtue in our response to them, to lose our courage, our justice, our integrity. For a ruler living under the constant shadow of conspiracy or coup, this practice changed everything. The fear of being overthrown could make a leader paranoid. It could make him cruel and isolated. It could drive him to eliminate rivals preemptively, to hoard resources, to trust no one. But by mentally walking through that very scenario, losing the purple robe, leaving the palace, the Stoic leader could ask a crucial question. If this happens, who will I choose to be? Will I rage and cling, or will I accept this turn of fate with the same reasoned dignity I tried to bring to the throne? By answering that question in advance, he disarmed the future. He took away its ability to hijack his character. You can see the practical application. Before a major battle, a general like Marcus Aurelius wouldn't just visualize victory. He would also calmly and systematically consider defeat. He would imagine the lines breaking, the standard falling, the report of loss reaching Rome. He would feel the weight of that potential outcome in his mind, not to succumb to despair, but to prepare his response. How would he rally the remaining troops? How would he communicate with the Senate? How would he protect the civilians in the path of a retreat? By visiting that mental territory beforehand, the paralyzing shock of a real setback was reduced. His energy could then flow into principled action, not frantic panic. A leader might also rehearse public disgrace, a failed policy, a scandal among his officials, a loss of popular support. By walking through that scenario, he could decide in advance. His response would be one of accountability, not blame shifting. Transparent correction, not covering up the truth. This rehearsal ensured that when pressure was at its peak, his integrity was already programmed in. So you bring this into your own sphere. Choose a scenario you fear in your professional or personal life, a project failing publicly, a difficult financial turn, a challenging conversation. Instead of anxiously worrying about the outcome, perform the Stoic rehearsal. Walk through it mentally, step by step, but focus your attention not on preventing the event, which may be outside your control. Focus on a single, powerful question. Within that challenging situation, how would I wish to conduct myself? What virtues would I want to demonstrate? Maybe it's honesty in admitting a mistake, courage in starting over, compassion for others affected, patience in navigating the hardship. By defining your desired character in advance, you build a neural pathway. You make it far more likely that when, or if, that moment arrives, you will act from principle, not from fear. You will lead yourself, and by extension anyone watching, with a steadiness that no misfortune can truly corrupt. How do you make fair decisions for millions when you're cut off by palace walls and guards? The Stoics had one answer: Sympatheia, a feeling togetherness. A cosmic bond, the idea that all rational beings are part of a single living fabric. For someone who could end a life with a nod, this was the safeguard. The thing that stopped dehumanization. It forced a shift. The people of the empire weren't just subjects, not just resources to tax and command. They were fellow participants in the same universal reason. To see them as less was to violate the natural order. Marcus Aurelius kept coming back to this. He wrote that we are made for cooperation, like feet, like hands. To act against each other is unnatural. And then he went further. He wrote that to injure the whole is to injure yourself, and to injure another is to injure the whole. Think about that weight for an emperor. Every unjust decree, every act of cruelty done in your name. It's not just politics, it's a self-inflicted wound on the system you're part of. This wasn't vague spirituality. It had practical force. It shaped policy. It was the foundation for just law and civic duty. A self-interested ruler might see a public work as a monument to his glory. But a leader with Sympatheia would see an aqueduct as service to the common body. Welfare wouldn't be a handout. It would be care for the limbs of the social organism. It created stewardship, not ownership. The empire wasn't his property. It was a community, and he was the leading member responsible for its health and fairness. This was the antidote to the isolation of power. The guards, the titles, the protocol, they build a wall. Sympatheia said the wall was an illusion. the farmer in Gaul, the merchant in Alexandria, the senator in Rome, the emperor on his throne. In the Stoic view, they were all citizens of the same Cosmopolis, breathing the same air, subject to the same fate, capable of the same reason. To forget that was to become a tyrant. So take that lens, look at your world, your community, find one person or group you see as other, a political opponent, a rival, someone from a different background. For a moment, apply the Stoic lens, see them not through the story of your conflict, but as a fellow participant in reason, someone with hopes, with struggles, with a shared origin in the same interconnected whole. This doesn't mean you agree with them. It means you choose to see their humanity as linked to your own. That shift in perception, however subtle, changes everything. It's the first quiet step away from us versus them, and toward living as part of a greater whole. The most powerful man in the world kept a philosopher with him, Junius Rusticus, and he revered Epictetus, who had been a slave. This wasn't just some eccentric hobby. It was a deliberate part of the Stoic framework, a system for integrity. Absolute rulers would put themselves in the position of a student. They sought counsel from men who held no office, commanded no armies. Their only authority was wisdom, and that created an external check, a voluntary humility. It guarded against the greatest danger of the throne, which is the echo chamber. A court is designed to agree, to flatter, to tell the emperor what he wants to hear, but a philosopher is designed to question, to challenge, to tell him what he needs to hear. Marcus Aurelius wrote that Rusticus was the man who introduced him to the teachings of Epictetus. From him, he said, he learned to read carefully, not to be satisfied with a superficial understanding. So you have the emperor of Rome sitting with his advisor, carefully studying the words of a former slave. Epictetus taught that we are not disturbed by events, but by our judgments about them. For a leader facing a rebellion or a plague, that single idea was a lifeline. It reframed every crisis, not as a personal attack, but as a test of character. This relationship was a sparring partner for the emperor's reason. It forced him to defend his judgments, to articulate his principles, to see his blind spots. Without that challenging voice, even the most disciplined mind can drift into self-justification. There's a different example, a more tragic one, in the letters of Seneca to the young Emperor Nero. Seneca wrote extensively on mercy, on duty, on the proper use of power. He advised Nero to rule with virtue, to be a father to his people, and for a time it seemed to take. Early in Nero's reign, he was praised for his clemency, but the system broke down. Nero eventually dismissed that counsel. He descended into the very tyranny Seneca had warned against. The framework only works if the leader voluntarily submits to it. The mentor can offer the tools, but the leader has to choose to use them. Contrast that with emperors like Domitian, who exiled philosophers, who saw independent thought as a threat. His reign grew increasingly paranoid and harsh. The Stoic model inverted that instinct. It said true security comes not from silencing critics, but from listening to the wisest ones. So bring this down from the palace. Who in your life has permission to challenge your assumptions, to hold you accountable to your principles? Not someone who simply opposes you, but someone who understands your values and cares enough to point out when you're drifting from them. That person is your Junius Rusticus. They are the external check on your personal power, however large or small that influence may be. Do you have that voice in your circle? And more importantly, do you cultivate the humility to truly listen when they speak? Because that relationship, that voluntary submission to a higher wisdom, is the final piece of the framework. It ensures the inner citadel is not just a lonely fortress, it's part of a wider community of reason. Marcus Aurelius had a palace. He could have had any luxury he wanted. But he often slept on a simple camp bed. That wasn't just a quirk, it was a discipline, a choice. In a world where every whim could be satisfied, he practiced saying no. This was Stoicism in action. It was how an emperor built a firewall, a barrier between his soul and the corrupting power of absolute wealth. The Stoics had a category for things like fine food, soft beds, ornate clothes. They called them preferred indifference. They might be nice, but they held no real moral value. To pursue them as ends in themselves was a trap. Seneca wrote about this. In his work on the Happy Life, he said luxury doesn't just delight the body, it enslaves the mind, it makes you soft, dependent, always craving more. For a leader, that dependency is a vulnerability. It shifts your focus from the substance of governance to the spectacle of your own status. You start making decisions to protect your comforts, not to serve the common good. This is why teachers like Musonius Rufus emphasized hard work, simple living. He argued that difficulty strengthens the soul, ease weakens it, so an emperor on a camp bed wasn't practicing self-denial as punishment. It was a psychological drill. He was reminding his own body and mind. His well-being did not depend on silk or gold. His capacity for reason, for justice, for courage was independent of his physical comforts. This practice fought a subtle corruption, entitlement. When you grow accustomed to extreme privilege, you begin to believe you deserve it. That belief creates a distance, a detachment from the reality of the people you lead. How can you understand a farmer's hardship if your own life is a continuous bubble of ease? You see this beyond the camp bed. Emperors like Augustus, he lived in a house noted for its modesty. Compared to the mansions of some senators, he wore plain woolen togas, ate the same simple food as soldiers on campaign. And perhaps most telling, they often refused excessive personal monuments. They directed public funds toward aqueducts, roads, granaries, infrastructure for the people. Not colossal statues of themselves. Each of these choices was a small, daily vote, a vote for substance over spectacle, for the integrity of the ruler's character over the inflation of his image. That discipline has a quiet power. It translates. We may not have imperial treasuries, but we are surrounded by the constant allure of more. More convenience, more luxury, more status symbols. The Stoic invitation is to periodically step back, to practice voluntary simplicity, not as a life sentence of austerity, but as a clarifying exercise. So the challenge is to choose one act of conscious simplicity. It could be declining an upgrade you don't truly need, cooking a simple meal from basic ingredients instead of ordering takeout, or spending an hour on a manual task, cleaning, gardening, without rushing through it, and then observe what happens in your mind. You'll likely notice two things. First, a subtle strengthening of self-sufficiency, and second, a clearing away of mental clutter, creating space to focus on what actually matters. In that clear space, you might find a deeper sense of authority over your own life, one no external luxury could ever provide. The most revealing document of imperial power was a private diary. Marcus Aurelius called it ta eis heauton, the things to himself. We call it Meditations. It wasn't a chronicle of events. It wasn't a memoir. It was a private court of justice. The emperor sat as both the accused and the judge. He held his own thoughts and actions to account every day. This was the practical mechanism, the workshop. This is where all the other Stoic disciplines were forged and tested and sharpened. In the quiet hours, likely by lamplight, he would take up his stylus and tablet, and there, with absolute honesty, he would conduct the review. He would cross-examine his impulses. He would reinforce his principles. He would correct his course. It was how he prevented the slow, invisible drift, the drift that turns a leader from a servant of the people into a servant of his own ego. Listen to the tone of these notes. It's direct, often stern, deeply personal. He doesn't address posterity. He addresses himself. In one passage he writes, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly." But then he follows with the corrective. I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, and have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own. He's not complaining about others, he's preparing his own mind, setting his expectations according to nature, not according to a wish for everyone to be agreeable. In another, he admonishes himself, you could be good today, but instead you choose tomorrow. The journal was the space where tomorrow's resolve became today's action. The practice had a structure, though he never outlined it. It was a nightly audit. He would look back on the day's events and ask the foundational questions. Did I act with justice in that meeting, or was I swayed by personal dislike? Did I give assent to a first impression of anger, and did I correct it? Did I confuse what is up to me, my effort, my integrity, with what is not up to me, the outcome, the praise? This wasn't about guilt, it was about clarity, the process of separating the signal of his own character from the noise of the world's reactions. By writing it down, he made the abstract concrete. A fleeting regret became a sentence to be analyzed. A moment of pride became a phrase to be examined under the light of the cosmic perspective. You can bring this court of justice into your own life. It doesn't require a leather-bound journal. The power is in the ritual of reflection. Tonight, or at the end of your workday, pause for a few minutes. Ask yourself one simple Stoic question about the day that has passed. Where did I confuse what is up to me with what is not? Perhaps you spent energy fretting over a delayed response from a colleague, something outside your control, instead of focusing on the clarity of your own communication, which was entirely within it. Or ask, when did I act from virtue and when did I act from reaction? The goal isn't to catalog failures, it's to create a moment of conscious recognition. A single sentence of honest observation has more power than 1,000 resolutions made in the abstract. This daily dialogue, this quiet meeting with yourself, builds the same internal accountability that guarded an emperor. It ensures that your inner citadel isn't just a theory you admire from a distance. It's a living structure you are actively fortifying, one honest reflection at a time. After a victory, a Roman general would have a slave whisper to him. They'd say, "Remember you are mortal." That was a Stoic ritual, a way to cool down the heat of triumph. For an emperor, this was necessary. It was a guard against the intoxication of success. That feeling could be just as corrupting as the despair of defeat. The Stoic approach was to treat victory and loss the same, with a kind of calm indifference, not indifference to the effort you put in, but indifference to the outcome itself. They had terms for this. They called outcomes preferred indifference or dispreferred indifference. Winning a battle was preferred, losing one was dispreferred. But neither one was a true good or a true evil. The only real good was the quality of your character in the pursuit. The only real evil was the corruption of that character. Whether you were celebrating or you were in sorrow, this whole idea acted as an emotional stabilizer. It kept a leader's internal compass steady, no matter how violent the external storms became. Marcus Aurelius wrote reminders to himself, even in success. He said the memory of everything is soon overwhelmed in time. He asked, what is even the most long-lived fame? It's utterly fleeting. He would think about the line of emperors before him. All their triumphs were now dust, forgotten stories. This wasn't meant to create cynicism. It was for perspective, to anchor his sense of worth not in the cheers of a parade, but in something more enduring, the satisfaction of having commanded with courage and justice and wisdom. Seneca wrote about fortune's fickleness. He said to treat her like a fickle guest. When she arrives with gifts, welcome her, but don't cling. When she leaves, let her go without despair. He said the wise person won't be exalted by prosperity or cast down by adversity because they try to depend chiefly on themselves, to derive their joy from themselves. Now imagine the contrast. A tyrant after a victory might stage a lavish triumph, parading defeated enemies in chains, boasting of divine favor. using the win to justify greater excess, harsher rule. His future decisions get inflated by hubris. He takes bigger risks, dismisses sound counsel. He starts to believe his success means he's above the natural order. The Stoic commander would do something different. He'd offer sacrifices of gratitude, honor the courage of his own troops, maybe even acknowledge the valor of a worthy foe. Then he'd return to the capital, resume his duties with the same steady diligence as before. The victory was a completed task, not a license for arrogance. This equanimity was just as vital in defeat. A bitter loss could tempt a leader toward cruelty, toward scapegoating his officers, making reckless decisions to salvage his wounded pride. The Stoic, who never attached his self-worth to the win, could look at the loss with clear eyes. What went wrong in our preparations? What can be learned? How do we care for the wounded and rebuild without vengeance? His virtue stayed intact, so his capacity for sound judgment stayed intact. So think about a recent moment in your own life. A promotion you celebrated or a project that fell short. How would your relationship to that event change if you saw the outcome itself as an indifferent? The true measure wasn't the title or the missed target. It was how you conducted yourself in the effort. Were you diligent, collaborative, ethical in the pursuit? Did you lead with integrity, whether your team met the quota or not? By separating the external result from your internal virtue, you free yourself from the roller coaster. A win becomes a pleasant confirmation, not a source of identity. A loss becomes a source of data, not a definition of your worth. That stable platform is where you make uncorrupted decisions. Far from the dizzying cliffs of pride or the swamps of resentment, a Stoic emperor faced an enemy without falling into hatred. It wasn't a tactic, it was a shift in how they saw things. They trained to see the logos, that universal reason, even in the people opposing them. That might have been the hardest discipline, to see humanity where others just saw a threat. It stopped that dehumanization, the kind that makes ruthless action feel right. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this. He told himself to love those who wronged him. His reasoning was, if both of them are part of the same social body, then hating a part of it harms the whole, and so it harms yourself. He saw adversaries not as monsters but as misguided family. People acting, however badly, from their own idea of what's good. That understanding changes conflict. It stops being a fight against pure evil. It becomes a response to a misalignment of reason. The goal shifts from annihilation to correction, or when correction isn't possible, to a defense, one done with a clear head, a steady heart. So the emperor's duty, seen this way, wasn't to crush a barbarian tribe for vengeance. It was to secure the frontier, not to execute a conspirator in rage, but to remove a threat to the common welfare, maybe even with some pity for the man's flawed reasoning. This philosophy shaped governance. In legal punishment, it leaned toward reform, not just vengeance. The point of justice was to realign the person with the rational order of the community, not merely to inflict suffering. In diplomacy, it allowed negotiation with hostile powers from a position of strength, a psychological strength, not just military. You could understand your opponent's perceived needs, their fears, their view of honor without agreeing with them. That created space for solutions. Solutions pure demonization would never allow. You can bring this to a current disagreement. Think of one person or one group whose stance you find frustrating, even offensive. For a moment, set aside your judgment of their actions. Try the exercise. Ask from their perspective, what reasonable belief might be driving their behavior? Maybe it's a belief in protecting their security, or upholding a tradition they value, or responding to a past injustice they feel. Articulating that internal logic, however flawed you find it, does something. It reinserts their humanity into the equation. It turns an opponent back into a person. This doesn't mean you surrender your principles or accept harmful behavior. It means you engage from a place of understanding, not hatred, and in that space your responses become more measured, more effective, and in the end more powerful. The emperor's strongest weapon against corruption was remembering every day that his rule would end, that his life would end. This practice, Memento Mori, it wasn't about dwelling on death. It was a focusing tool, a deadline. When you know for certain that death is coming, the whole scramble for power, for money, for getting even, it starts to look irrational. It's like collecting coins for a trip you know you'll never make, and in that clear light, only one kind of action holds any meaning, action that's virtuous. The kind that lasts longer than you do. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this. He'd list the emperors before him in his Meditations, name them one after another. And then he'd note they're all gone now, turned to ash or buried or just forgotten. He wrote about thinking of all of existence where you're the smallest part. All of time where you get just a moment, destiny, and how little of it is yours. That view didn't freeze him, it moved him. It created an urgency, a need to act rightly in the time you actually have. There's no putting off justice then, no delaying hard reforms for a better time. That time might not come, and the small corruptions, the daily greeds and jealousies, they show themselves. They're just distractions from the real work of a life. This awareness changed how decisions were made. Before making a ruling or signing an order, a Stoic leader could ask one question. If I died tomorrow, is this the last act I'd want as my legacy? Would I be okay with this as the final mark of my character? That question removes the posturing, the vanity, the short-term politics. It asks for something real, for your actions to match your deepest principles. Because when you're playing for an audience of eternity, you play differently. So you bring that deadline into your own world, not to create fear, but to create clarity. Ask yourself this: if you lived this coming week as if it were your last, what one thing would become essential? Maybe it's that honest talk you've been avoiding because leaving it unsaid would be wrong, or finally fixing a mistake, even if it's late and awkward. Because not fixing it would stay with you, or it could just be leading your team with patience today instead of pressure, because you'd want that to be your last note. This isn't about grand final acts, it's about finding what's essential. It shows you what matters when time feels short, and in doing that, it pushes aside the small corruptions we live with. The white lies, the cut corners, the compromises we tell ourselves we'll fix later. The Stoic deadline says later isn't promised. Now is all you have to build the character you want to leave behind. The emperor was surrounded by yes men, and his most important conversation was the one he had in silence with himself. The court was full of flattery, reports of public adoration, whispers about how beloved he was. But his attention was turned inward to a different standard. Stoicism taught a radical substitution. It replaced the hunger for applause, for external applause, with a dialogue. A dialogue with your own reasoned conscience. Success wasn't measured by the noise of the crowd anymore. It was measured by the quiet verdict, the verdict of an internal court. The question wasn't, are they praising me? It was, did I act with wisdom? Did I act with justice? Epictetus, the former slave, his words were studied in the palace. He was blunt on this. He told his students, it's impossible to begin learning what you think you already know. And if you're seeking to have people think well of you, you've thrown away your outline. You've abandoned the project of building your own character for the fickle project of managing opinions, other people's opinions. He argued you can't control what people say about you. You can't control what they think. That's outside the inner citadel. What you can control is whether you live according to your nature as a rational being. Marcus Aurelius echoed this in his private writings. He constantly reminded himself of the emptiness of posthumous fame. He wrote, in a little while you will be nobody and nowhere. And what you're living through now, the people you're trying to please, the legacy you're trying to build, all of that will be gone. The only thing that endures in the moment you're living it is the quality of your choices. This internal shift created an immunity, a powerful immunity. It made a leader resistant to two corrupting forces, two of the oldest forces in politics, populism and sycophancy. A populist leader is addicted to the cheer of the mob. He shapes his policies not by what's right, but by what's popular in the moment. He offers bread and circuses, short-term pleasure, to avoid the hard work. The hard work of long-term justice. The Stoic leader, his validation came from within, so he could make the unpopular decision, the principled decision. He could raise taxes for a necessary aqueduct, even with the grumbling. He could refuse to stage costly gladiatorial games to boost his ratings, and instead fund a public granary. For times of hardship, his compass was internal, so he wasn't blown off course by the changing winds. The winds of public sentiment, sycophancy, the flattery of courtiers was equally disarmed. When an advisor told the emperor he was like a god, the Stoic mind had a prepared response. It would compare that lavish praise against the internal record. Did I exercise God-like wisdom today, or did I lose my temper in that meeting? Did I show divine justice, or did I favor a friend unfairly? The flattery held against that honest self-audit would ring hollow. It would be seen for what it was, not a truth but a tool used by others to manipulate the external validation machine. And by shutting down that machine, the leader took away the flatterer's power. You can notice this dynamic in your own life, in any position of influence, however small. The next time you finish a presentation, or send an important email, or make a decision for your family, pause. Notice the immediate pull, the pull to look for external validation. Did they like it? Will I get praised? Will they be upset with me? That pull is natural. The Stoic practice is to consciously substitute the internal question. Before you check for the reaction, ask yourself first, was my action aligned with my principles? Did I communicate with honesty, with clarity? Did I make that choice with the well-being of all in mind? By answering that internal question first, you anchor your sense of worth. You anchor it to something solid and within your control. The external feedback, whether it's praise or criticism, then becomes data to consider. Not the verdict that defines you. A devastating plague killed millions. The empire was teetering. This was the ultimate test of the Stoic framework. The Antonine Plague swept through the Roman world. A crisis of unimaginable scale. For Marcus Aurelius, it wasn't a hypothetical exercise. It was the furnace. Every discipline he had practiced was forged into action there. His response shows the framework, not as a set of abstract ideas, but as an operating system for leadership when everything is falling apart. First, Amor Fati. The love of fate. He did not rail against the gods. He didn't search for someone to blame. He accepted the reality of the plague. It was the material he had to work with. In his meditations, likely written during these years, he reflects on that acceptance. He writes that what stands in the way becomes the way. The plague was now the way. His duty was to navigate it with virtue. That acceptance freed his energy, freed it from denial and panic, and channeled it entirely into response. Then, the discipline of action. Action for the common welfare. While many wealthy citizens fled Rome, Marcus Aurelius stayed. He remained in the heart of the suffering, organizing relief efforts. He used imperial funds to pay for the burial of the poor, to consult with physicians, to maintain order. He saw the people not as a statistic of loss, but as fellow members of the Cosmopolis, deserving of dignity even in their passing. This was Sympatheia in practice, the feeling togetherness. It prevented the powerful from becoming detached from the plight of the people. His actions were guided by Premeditatio, the premeditation of evils. The Stoic leader does not believe disaster only happens to others. He had mentally rehearsed scenarios of loss, instability, public despair. When the plague arrived, the shock was mitigated. the emotional space created by that rehearsal allowed him to move more quickly. To logistical solutions, he wasn't paralyzed by the novelty of the horror. He was prepared to engage with it as a leader. Throughout it all, he practiced equanimity. He treated the terrible outcome, the mass loss of life, with the same steady resolve he would have applied to a military victory. He writes in this period about doing the next right thing, about not being overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the tragedy, but focusing on the immediate, virtuous action available. He notes that we must stand upright ourselves, not be held upright. His calmness was not indifference, it was a steadfast refusal, a refusal to let the external chaos corrupt his internal capacity to reason and to care. This convergence of principles created a resilient response, an ethical response under impossible pressure. He didn't become a tyrant, seizing absolute control in fear. He didn't retreat into superstition or luxury. He governed. He made hard choices about resources. He comforted grieving families. He upheld the law. He demonstrated the framework's purpose. It was not to create a perfect, pain-free life, but to create an incorruptible character, capable of facing any life brings. So consider a collective challenge we face today. A community issue, a workplace crisis, a period of widespread uncertainty. Choose just one of these Stoic lenses. Perhaps it's accepting the situation with Amor Fati. Not as a personal affront, but as the shared material your community must now sculpt together. Or maybe it's focusing your next action solely on the common welfare. Asking not what's easiest for you, but what serves the health of the whole group. By applying a single principle, you begin to transform the crisis from a source of anxiety into a field for purposeful, virtuous action. You start to lead not from a place of fear, but from that inner citadel of calm resolve. If this framework worked so well, why did Rome still have a Nero or a Caligula? That's the clarifying question. The Stoic system wasn't a magic spell over an empire. It was a personal discipline, a voluntary choice. A ruler had to willingly submit to that internal court. When that submission failed, the framework couldn't force virtue from the outside. It couldn't prevent a corrupt will, but its purpose shifted from guiding the hand that held power to fortifying the hearts of those who suffered under it. That reveals the philosophy's deeper strength. It was a toolkit for integrity, whether you were the emperor on the throne or a citizen living under his shadow. Think of Seneca, the Stoic philosopher thrust into the court of the young Emperor Nero. His writings on mercy and duty were meant to guide the ruler. For a time they seemed to. Early in Nero's reign, the emperor showed clemency, but as Nero's nature asserted itself, Seneca was in an impossible position. An advisor to a man increasingly resistant to advice, wealthy from a court he increasingly saw as corrupt. His letters from that period reflect the struggle. How to maintain your inner citadel when the outer world is collapsing. He wrote about the distinction between external circumstance and internal freedom. A person could be chained, he argued, and still be free in their mind. A person could wear purple robes and be a slave to their own passions. For Seneca, for any Stoic under a bad emperor, the philosophy became one of dignified endurance. Finding the sphere of action still available, sometimes that action was quiet counsel, sometimes a strategic withdrawal, and sometimes, as in Seneca's own fate, when he was ordered to end his own life, it was about meeting an unjust end with calm resolve. To show in his final moments that his character was not Nero's to command, the starkest illustration is a father and son, Marcus Aurelius, who embodied the disciplines, and his son Commodus, who utterly rejected them. Marcus had his son tutored by the best Stoic minds. He tried to pass on the framework, but the choice to internalize it, to do the hard work on the self, is always personal. Commodus chose a different path. Upon becoming emperor, he reveled in the spectacle of power. He fought as a gladiator in the arena, seeking the roars of the crowd. He renamed months of the year after himself. He ruled with capricious cruelty, seeing the empire as his personal playground. The result was a violent unraveling. It showed that without the inner discipline, absolute power acted like a poison. It amplified every flaw. The framework Marcus used to build stability, Commodus's lack of it used to accelerate decay. The system couldn't save Rome from Commodus because Commodus refused to use it. This brings us to the practical application. Most of us are not absolute rulers. We are more often in the position of Seneca. We operate within systems, companies, communities, families that we don't fully control, systems that can be flawed, short-sighted, corrupting. The Stoic question then changes. It's no longer, how do I wield power flawlessly? It becomes, how do I maintain my own character within a flawed environment? The principles are the same, but their focus turns inward. You practice the view from above to see the petty politics of your workplace for what they are, temporary and small. You use the discipline of assent to pause before reacting to a superior's unfair decision, choosing a response over a reaction. You perform your daily actions with an eye toward the common welfare, even if your leadership does not. You define success by the integrity of your effort, not by the external rewards a broken system may or may not provide. In this way, you build your own inner citadel. Not to rule an empire, but to ensure no outer empire can ever truly rule you. The framework wasn't something you'd find in a speech. It was in the quiet hours, the emperor's daily routine. Before the first petitioner, before the military dispatches, a private ritual was already finished. That's how abstract philosophy became lived character. Through repetition, the Stoics saw integrity under pressure not as one grand decision, but as the product of countless small rehearsals, daily ones. They ritualized the disciplines, weaving them into the fabric of their day, until reacting with virtue was automatic, like breathing. Their ideal day had a three-part rhythm. It started in the morning with Premeditatio Malorum, the premeditation of future challenges. This wasn't anxious worry. It was a calm, strategic visualization. Before rising, a leader like Marcus Aurelius would mentally walk through the day ahead. He'd anticipate the difficult people he might meet, the potential setbacks, the temptations to pride or anger. In his writings, he lays this practice out. He tells himself, today I shall meet with meddling, ungrateful, arrogant people. But then he reframes it. He continues, I can neither be harmed by these people, nor can I be angry with one who is my kin. That morning ritual set his expectations according to nature, not wishful thinking. It prepared his mind to meet each event not with surprise but with a pre-chosen virtue. Then came the daytime application. This was where the morning preparation met reality. Every interaction, every decision became a field for practice. A frustrating meeting was material for the discipline of assent. A moment of success was an exercise in equanimity. The constant pull of flattery was a test of the internal court. The day was no longer just a series of tasks. It was a continuous training ground. The goal shifted from merely accomplishing things to accomplishing them well, with justice, courage, and wisdom. As dusk fell, the final ritual began, the evening review. Seneca describes his own version. He writes that he would examine his entire day, going back over what he had done and said. He would ask himself pointed questions. What fault of mine did I cure today? What temptation did I resist? In what way am I better? He said his sleep was sweeter when he had reviewed his actions and measured his character. This was the accountability mechanism. It turned vague regret into specific, actionable insight. A leader could note, in that meeting I gave assent to a first impression of irritation. Tomorrow I will pause for 3 breaths before responding. The review closed the loop, turning daily experience into permanent wisdom. For us, the power isn't in replicating an ancient Roman schedule. It's in capturing the essence of that rhythm. A minimalist modern version could be very simple. It requires only 2 intentional bookends to your day. In the morning, take 5 quiet minutes. Instead of reaching for your phone, sit with a question. What is the main challenge I will likely face today? And what single virtue, patience, clarity, courage, will I need to meet it well? Just naming it prepares your mind. Then, in the evening, take another 5 minutes. Ask a different set of questions. Where today did I act from my best principles, and where did I react from habit or fear? The goal isn't self-criticism. It's honest observation, like an engineer reviewing data from a test flight to improve the next one. This tiny ritual, practiced consistently, does the slow, steady work of architecture. It builds the inner citadel, one brick of awareness at a time. So the invitation is this: what is one small, repeatable ritual you could introduce tomorrow? Maybe it's that 2-question morning and evening pause, or a single mindful breath before you answer a difficult email, or a moment to recall the view from above when a problem feels overwhelming. Choose one action so simple you cannot refuse it, and then repeat it, not for a week, but as the quiet cornerstone of your own daily framework. Because in that repetition, you move the philosophy from your bookshelf into your bones, making your character, not your circumstances, the most powerful force in the room. Great leaders fixate on what they'll leave behind. The Stoic emperors aimed to be forgotten, and for the right reasons. That might be the most counterintuitive part of their whole approach. Their culture built arches to celebrate victories. They carved histories into stone for eternity, and yet the most powerful men among them practiced this deliberate indifference. Not toward their duty, but toward being remembered for it. They saw that hunger for fame after you're gone. It's just another external thing, another opinion held by people who aren't even born yet, something completely outside your control. To tether everything you do now to that future echo that was giving up your sovereignty all over again. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this with such clarity. He said, "Soon you will have forgotten everything, and soon everyone will have forgotten you." He pictured time as this endless river, washing away every name, every deed. All our anxious striving to be remembered, he saw it like writing your name in the sand as the tide's going out. The waves are already coming. This wasn't a message about futility. It was about liberation, profound liberation. It freed a leader from looking at everything through the lens of history, from the temptation to make choices not for their immediate justice, but for how they'd read in the chronicles later. So the Stoic question became very simple. If no one would ever know I did this, would it still be the right thing to do? That question purified intention. It separated real virtue from performance. You can see the practical impact in what they chose. An emperor obsessed with his legacy, he might commission a huge golden statue of himself for the forum. A massive, expensive monument to his own glory. It doesn't serve the common welfare. It drains the treasury, but it etches his image into the city for centuries. The Stoic leader, indifferent to that legacy, would look at the same funds and ask something else. What serves the people now? The answer might be an aqueduct. A simple, functional stone aqueduct bringing clean water to a crowded district. He might not even demand his name be carved into the side. The virtuous act was providing the water. Remembering who provided it was irrelevant. That indifference also stopped historical whitewashing. A leader craving a perfect legacy is tempted to hide failures, to punish historians who tell the truth, to craft a flawless story. The Stoic, accepting that all memory fades, had no need for the lie. He could admit mistakes in his own private journals, which Marcus did, because the only audience that really mattered was his own conscience. The judgment of future generations had no power over him, so take this to a goal you're pursuing now, a project at work, a creative endeavor, something personal. Ask yourself this: is my main motivation here rooted in how I want to be seen by others, or even by history? or is it rooted in the intrinsic value of the action itself? Does the work feel meaningful even if you never get credit for it? The answer helps you find your own center of gravity. When you act from that intrinsic place, you're free. Free from the anxiety of how you're perceived, free to pour your best effort into the work itself, not the presentation of the work. And in that freedom, you might just create something that endures precisely because you weren't trying to build a monument. You were just doing your duty and doing it well. Anger is a natural reaction to betrayal, to injustice. For an emperor, someone with the power to destroy, it was the most dangerous emotion there was. Seneca called it a brief madness, a complete surrender of reason to passion, and for a ruler, that was a luxury they couldn't afford. The Stoic analysis was precise. They taught that anger is always based on a mistaken judgment, the judgment that you've been wronged in a way that actually harms your core self, your virtue. But the Stoics held that no external event could ever damage your virtue. Only your own choices could do that, so the feeling of being personally wounded was an error. A corruption of logic before it ever became an action. That framework gave them a clear protocol. The first step was always delay, the discipline of assent. When the hot flash of anger came hearing about a subordinate's theft or a rival's insult, the trained leader would impose a mandatory pause. Seneca advised counting the letters of the alphabet before speaking. The goal was to create a space between the impression of wrong and the reaction. In that space, reason could re-enter. The leader would then refocus on the only thing ever truly up to him, his own response. Not the past action of the other person, which was now fixed, but the future action he would choose. Seneca's work on anger is a manual for this. He writes that punishment should look like surgery, not a brawl. The surgeon's hand is steady, his mind focused on healing, not on the emotion of cutting. Anger, he says, is never useful. It clouds judgment. It leads to excessive cruelty. And it ultimately damages the state more than the original crime did. The Stoic leader's duty was to transmute that raw energy, to turn it into calm, deliberate, and just corrective action. Imagine a provincial governor is caught embezzling public funds, money meant for grain. The angry, corrupted response is vengeance, immediate arrest. A harsh public punishment designed to humiliate, a swift example made to instill fear. That reaction is about the leader's wounded pride. The Stoic response begins with that deliberate pause. The leader allows the initial surge to pass, then he asks the reframing questions. What is up to me? I cannot unspend the stolen money. I can control how I investigate this, how I judge it, how I rectify it. The goal shifts. It shifts from expressing personal outrage to restoring justice, to restoring systemic health. The action becomes a formal investigation. A fair trial based on evidence, a proportional punishment, and then a review of the accounting procedures that allowed the theft to happen. The energy gets channeled into reform, not retaliation. So the next time you feel anger rising, you pause. You ask that simple, Stoic question. What, in this situation, is truly up to me, and what just action does that allow? It turns the heat of anger into the light of a problem to be solved. It protects your integrity, and it often leads to a solution that's both stronger and more humane than anything you'd do in rage. The Stoic emperor wasn't a statue, he was a man. He'd wake up tired or irritable, tempted, and he had a system to return. That might be the most human part. Accepting imperfection, knowing lapses aren't just possible, they're expected. So the leader's duty wasn't to be flawless, it was to have a reliable method. A way to get back on the path after stumbling. That prevented a subtle corruption, the corruption of despair, because if a leader believes he must be perfect, the first mistake shatters that image. The shame can lead to hiding errors, blaming others, abandoning the principles entirely. They feel too difficult. The Stoic view was more practical. They spoke of progress, not perfection. Epictetus compared the student to someone recovering from a long illness. You don't expect to run a marathon the first day you leave bed. You celebrate the small steps. Walking across the room without assistance, each day you grow a little stronger. The goal is forward motion, not mastery. Marcus Aurelius showed this in his private writings. He constantly forgave himself and others for natural faults. He wrote, "Be tolerant with others and strict with yourself," but even that strictness was tempered. In one passage, he tells himself not to be angry at his own anger, to see it as part of human nature, something to be gently corrected, not a monstrous failure that defines him. That created resilience. It turned every mistake from a catastrophe into a data point, training material for the next attempt. Think of the practical application. An emperor makes a poor strategic decision based on bad intelligence. A town suffers. The proud, perfectionist leader might double down, suppress reports, punish messengers, continue the failed policy to avoid admitting a flaw. His ego can't tolerate it. The Stoic leader, operating from acceptance, would do the opposite, acknowledge the error publicly to his council, order corrective measures for the town, and then analyze the lapse not as a moral failing but as a breakdown in his process for verifying information. His next act would be to improve that process. The mistake becomes raw material for building a better system. It strengthens the state instead of weakening his authority, because his authority is rooted in integrity, not infallibility. So bring this compassion into your own practice. Recall a recent failure, a moment you reacted poorly, a goal you fell short of. Instead of the spiral of self-condemnation, perform the Stoic reframe. Look at that event as pure training material. Ask yourself, what did this stumble teach me about my own judgments? Where did I give assent too quickly? What virtue was lacking in that moment? By extracting that single lesson, you transform the experience. It's no longer a mark against your character. It's the very thing that sharpens your character for the next challenge. Resilience is built this way, not by never falling, but by learning with kindness and clarity how to rise each time. The Stoics had this idea of a law of nature. It was the foundation of everything. Before you could write a human law, you had to understand this deeper law. That was Stoic physics, not science, but the study of the cosmos as a rational, living whole. They called it the logos, a kind of intelligence in everything. In the stars, in human reason, for a ruler, this wasn't poetry. It was the source of authority, a standard of justice beyond opinion, beyond tradition. Beyond an emperor's whim. To govern well was to align your laws with this natural law. Marcus Aurelius wrote about it, the universe as a single living being. One substance, one soul, all things woven together. To go against that nature, he said, creates your own discord. So leadership wasn't about preference. It was about following the logic of a cooperative system. Cleans wrote a hymn to Zeus praising this divine reason. He said humans are its offspring. To live by reason was to live in harmony with our own nature and with the cosmos. That cosmic view grounded every ethical rule. Why be just? Because the universe is ordered by reason, and justice is that rationality between thinking beings. Why courage? Because nature moves through challenge and growth, and courage is our part in that. Why mercy? Because all rational beings share the same logos. Their kin, so morality wasn't a list of commands, it was living in accordance with reality. A law promoting greed or cruelty wasn't just unpopular. It was irrational, a violation of the natural order. You see it in their idea of just war. War wasn't for ambition. It was only to defend the Cosmopolis, the universal city of rational beings. To restore a violated order, to protect cooperation. Even their view of the environment came from this. The world wasn't a storehouse to plunder. It was the sacred, physical manifestation of the logos. Stewardship was a rational duty to the whole. So you look at a rule you live by, a company policy, a cultural norm, a personal principle. Ask the Stoic question. Does it promote rational cooperation and the common good, or does it serve a narrow, irrational interest? Hold it up to nature's law, the standard of what fosters a healthy, interconnected whole. You see its true purpose, and you have a quiet standard for your own judgments, one that passing opinion can't corrupt. The emperor's attention was the real scarcity. Not gold. Every day the palace would fill with reports, petitions, whispers, military dispatches from the frontiers, petitions from citizens, courtiers with secrets about rivals. Gossip, flattery, rumors. If he tried to take it all in, his mind would drown. His clarity would go first. The Stoics saw the mind not as a container, but as a garden. What you allow to take root grows. Every piece of gossip you entertain, every flattering word you take in, every alarming report you dwell on, it's planting a seed. It shapes your judgments, your moods, your actions. So the emperor's first duty was border control for his own consciousness. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this. He said, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize that, and you find strength. In another passage, he's more direct. He writes, refuse to let your mind dwell on what other people say and do. Attend to your own guiding principle, your own work. This was the economy of attention, budgeting a finite resource, investing it only in impressions that were true, necessary, and good. The corrupting influences were easy to spot. The sycophant who spends an hour on your divine brilliance, that impression, if allowed in, inflates the ego. The courtier with a salacious rumor about a rival, that impression, if entertained, breeds paranoia. The sensational report of a minor border skirmish, framed as an invasion. That impression, if believed, triggers panic. The disciplined leader learned to filter at the gate. He would listen to the sycophant, recognize the words as a tool, and let them pass through. He would hear the rumor, note it, but refuse to let it paint a picture until there was evidence. He would get the alarming report, but cross-reference it with comma advisors before letting it dictate his state. This meant cultivating specific sources, not yes men but truth-tellers, not people who dealt in gossip, but in verified facts and sober analysis. He sought diverse counsel, a general's view, an economist's view, a governor's view, each grounded in experience, not whispers. That mental hygiene had a direct impact. A reactive ruler consuming fear and flattery makes impulsive, cruel decisions. A leader with a guarded mind, consuming reason and evidence, makes measured ones. His internal stability became the empire's external stability. Your modern court is vast. It's the news feed that highlights conflict, the social stream that measures worth in likes. The coworker with the dramatic office story, the internal voice that replays a single criticism. Each is a petition for your attention, your most precious resource. The Stoic challenge is a brief attention audit. Before the day ends, ask one question. What sources today fed my fear, my anger, my vanity, and which ones fed my reason, my compassion? Just noticing begins to shift the balance. It puts you back at the border gate of your own mind with the power to decide what gets entry. Absolute power is often seen as a reward. The Stoic saw it differently. He saw it as a demanding post, a post he was grateful to have been assigned. That subtle shift in perspective was a powerful defense. It took the immense weight of leadership and changed it. It wasn't a burden that could breed resentment anymore. It became a rare opportunity, a gift to be thankful for. Within the Stoic view of the Cosmopolis, the universal city, being placed in a position of influence wasn't about personal glory. It was a specific duty. Handed to you by the rational order of things, a chance to exercise the virtues you'd been cultivating, but on the largest possible canvas. And for that chance, gratitude was the only rational response. You see this clearly in the private writings of Marcus Aurelius. His meditations open with a chapter of pure gratitude. He gives thanks not for his empire or his wealth, but for the people in his life. He lists them: his grandfather, his father, his mother, his tutors. He thanks them for specific qualities they modeled: integrity, self-control, piety. He even gives thanks to the gods for good health, for the strength to endure his duties. This practice grounded him. It reminded him that his capacity to lead was built on a foundation laid by others and by fortune. It connected his power to a web of gifts, not to a pedestal of isolated achievement. In later passages, he extends this gratitude to hardships themselves. He writes that what stands in the way becomes the way, and he is thankful for the obstacles that allow him to prove his strength. A difficult person becomes a training partner for patience. A complex crisis becomes the material for exercising wisdom. This refrain neutralized the seeds of entitlement. An entitled leader feels the world owes him obedience and comfort. A grateful leader feels he owes the world his best service. Imagine the practical ritual this could inspire. A Roman emperor, before entering the council chamber where senators would bow and await his command, might pause for a private moment. His internal monologue wouldn't be, "Look at all these people who must listen to me." It would be, "I am thankful for this council, for the chance to listen and to guide. I am thankful for the stability that allows us to meet, and for the responsibility to steward it well." He might even begin the meeting with a reminder of their shared purpose: to serve the people of Rome. Framing the session not as an exercise of his will, but as a collective effort he is privileged to lead, this gratitude directly countered the emotional pathways to corruption. Resentment is a corrosive force. A leader who feels burdened by the endless petitions, the crises, the criticism, starts to feel put upon. That feeling can justify cutting corners. "I've given so much, I deserve this special privilege," he might think, taking a bribe or favoring a friend. Entitlement whispers that the rules are for others. Gratitude silences that whisper by constantly answering, "This duty itself is the privilege." So bring this to your own sphere of influence. Think of a role you hold that sometimes feels like a weight. A responsibility as a parent, a team lead at work, even the duties of citizenship. In a moment of frustration, try the Stoic reframe. Ask yourself, what specific virtue does this challenging situation allow me to practice? If a child's repeated question tries your patience, that moment is your assignment to practice patience. If a bureaucratic process at work feels inefficient, it is your material for practicing perseverance and clear communication. If a community issue sparks disagreement, it is your opportunity to practice civic empathy and constructive dialogue. By seeing the duty as the very gymnasium where your character is strengthened, you can meet it with a sense of purpose. And even a quiet thanks for the chance to grow stronger. The weight doesn't disappear, but it is transformed. It becomes something meaningful, something that builds you as it asks something of you. A Stoic emperor wasn't cold. His kindness was strategic. It came from wisdom, not from a fear of being disliked. That's the distinction the framework enforced. Their idea of compassion, what they called philanthropia, the love of humanity, was clear-eyed. It was strong. It was never sentimental, because sentiment could be manipulated. For a ruler, that was a direct path to corruption. True kindness, in their view, was always aligned with justice, with reason. It meant acting for the genuine, long-term good of the other person. Even when that action was difficult, even when it was met with immediate displeasure. The philosopher Musonius Rufus taught this. He said the wise person will certainly help others, but they will not do so by participating in their errors or their vice. To give in to a harmful request, to allow an injustice because confronting it is uncomfortable, that isn't kindness. It's a form of cowardice. It's placing your own desire to be liked above the other person's actual welfare. Seneca echoed this. He wrote that sometimes the most beneficial thing we can do is to say no. To deny a friend a loan they would squander, to enforce a boundary with a subordinate who is exploiting goodwill, that firmness isn't a lack of care. It is care projected over a longer timeline. You can see the practical tension this resolved for a leader. On one side lies the corrupting force of cruelty. The tyrant who punishes excessively, who rules through fear, who sees any challenge as a personal insult to be crushed. His actions are for his own satisfaction, not for the common good. On the other side lies the corrupting force of weakness, the leader who appeases everyone, who cannot bear to deliver bad news or enforce a difficult rule. He allows the treasury to be plundered by favorites. He lets discipline in the legions decay. He permits powerful senators to bully the weak. His reign is marked by a slow unraveling, a descent into chaos because he feared being the bad guy. The Stoic approach carved a firm middle path between these two failures. It was kindness with a backbone, considered justice. A corrupt, cruel ruler might order the execution of a soldier for a minor infraction to make an example. A weak ruler might let the same soldier go unpunished, damaging unit cohesion. The Stoic commander would administer a just, proportional punishment, perhaps a reduction in pay or extra duties, aimed not at vengeance but at reform, at the preservation of discipline for the safety of all. The action is firm, but its intent is restorative, or consider aid. A weak leader might distribute free grain indefinitely, creating dependency and bankrupting the state. A Stoic leader, acting with philanthropia, might instead commission public works projects, paying citizens to build aqueducts and roads. This aid empowers, it builds skills and infrastructure, it reinforces the dignity of work, it looks beyond the immediate cheer of a handout to the long-term health of the person and the community. This requires a leader to constantly audit their own motives. Am I making this lenient choice because it is truly the most rational and just path, or am I making it because I dread the conflict? The unpopularity, the momentary dislike it will generate, the Stoic inner court was always in session on this question. So before your next difficult decision, with a family member, a colleague, someone you lead, pause. Ask yourself this clarifying question: am I being nice out of a fear of conflict or a desire for approval, or am I being kind by mustering the courage to do what I rationally believe is truly best for all involved? Even if it requires a firm hand, that moment of honest reflection is where you exercise the same clear-eyed compassion that governed an empire. It ensures your strength serves others, and never becomes a weapon for either cruelty or cowardice. The higher you go, the lonelier it gets, and that loneliness creates fear. The Stoics built a different kind of companionship. It wasn't the unreliable company of people at court. It was a connection to something unshakable, the logos, that universal reason. It meant the emperor was never really alone. He was in a constant conversation with the rational structure of the cosmos, and with every other person who shared in that same reason. That was the deep cure for the isolation of command. He could look at a senator from a rival family or a soldier from a distant province, and he wouldn't see a potential threat. He'd see a fellow participant. In the same grand project of existence, Marcus Aurelius wrote about this directly. He reminded himself that a rational being is by nature a social being. To turn against another person, he said, is to turn against nature itself. He found companionship in the writings of philosophers who had died centuries before. In his Meditations, he speaks of the dead, not as gone but as present in their teachings and their example, that created an invisible council. A council of the wise, always available, always offering counsel free from flattery, free from hidden agendas. Their wisdom was a steady companion, especially in the silent hours of the night. When paranoia likes to whisper, this internal shift impacted external security. Every ruler needs protection, but the mindset behind it defines the reign. A leader steeped in isolation and suspicion sees enemies in every shadow. He expands the palace guard into a secret police. He listens to informants who profit by inventing conspiracies. He begins purges, removing anyone who might possibly someday pose a threat. That's the architecture of tyranny. Built brick by brick from fear, the Stoic leader was different, grounded in Sympatheia and the cosmic perspective. He took necessary precautions, but he didn't descend into a siege mentality. His security was to protect the office, to protect the stability of the state, not to wall off his own fragile ego. He could trust the virtue of his own judgments. So he didn't need to control the private thoughts of every advisor. He understood that some dissent wasn't treason. It was a function of a healthy state. He could therefore distinguish between a genuine threat and a mere difference of opinion. That discernment saved lives. It preserved talent. It kept the channels of honest communication open because people weren't terrified to speak. The fortress he built was in his character, not just around his person. So when you feel isolated or misunderstood in your own sphere, consider the Stoic reframe. Can you cultivate a sense of connection, a connection to a broader community? A community of ideals or of humanity itself, rather than seeking validation from a specific few? Your sense of belonging doesn't have to depend on approval. The approval of a particular group or individual. It can be anchored in the shared human condition, in the pursuit of principles larger than yourself, or in the lineage of thinkers and doers who faced similar challenges. This doesn't make the loneliness vanish, but it puts it in a much larger room. A far less frightening room. A lifetime of good rule is a triumph, but could that framework be passed down? Could good governance become a tradition? The Stoics thought character could be taught. Marcus Aurelius bet everything on that idea with his son, Commodus. He surrounded the boy with the best Stoic tutors. Junius Rusticus was one, the same man who had taught Marcus. The curriculum wasn't military tactics or administration. It was the inner work, the morning reflections, the evening reviews, studying Epictetus, an attempt to build that inner citadel in the next emperor, stone by stone, starting in childhood. We know the plan didn't take. Commodus, when he got power, rejected it completely. He chased the roar of the gladiator crowds. He demanded worship as a living god. He ruled by whim and fear. It's a clear case study in the limits of an imposed philosophy. You can provide the tools, the teachers, the texts, but you can't force another person to do that hard, daily work on themselves. The choice to look inward, to delay gratification, to seek an internal court over external applause, that choice stays personal. Some historians say Commodus's personality loved spectacle, instant adoration. The quiet, rigorous Stoic path felt like a prison to him. Others point out that being born to absolute power, never having to earn it, might strip away the humility you need to see yourself as a student. The framework requires you to feel like a work in progress. For someone told from birth they are the finished masterpiece, that feeling is impossible. Marcus Aurelius probably sensed the danger. In his private writings, he reflects on the character of the people around him. He notes their faults with a clear, disappointed eye. He never names Commodus, but the concern is there. He writes about the importance of surrounding yourself with good people because we become like our associations. He laments those spoiled by luxury and praise. You can read a father's quiet anxiety in those lines. The education was there, but the internal motivation, the voluntary submission to the discipline, was missing. There's a lesson there for anyone developing others, leading a team, or raising a family. Instruction alone isn't enough. You have to cultivate the conditions for internal motivation. That doesn't happen through lecture. It happens through shared inquiry, through modeling the framework in your own daily struggles, through asking questions that prompt self-reflection, not giving answers that demand obedience. It's about creating an environment where choosing virtue feels like an act of personal strength, not a burdensome rule. So consider your own sphere. What principle are you hoping to pass on? Integrity in small things, maybe. Resilience in the face of setbacks. Ask yourself, is your method mostly external instruction, or are you creating space for shared discovery? Are you showing, through your own actions, why the harder path is more rewarding? The true transmission happens in those quiet moments of example, and in the patient conversations that help another person choose for themselves to walk inside the walls of their own inner citadel. The Roman Empire is gone, but the problem of power that hasn't gone anywhere. You can still see the old framework, not in big speeches, in small actions. A business leader passes on a huge bonus, puts that money into the team, into research. That's the discipline of desire, choosing a healthy company over personal wealth. A community organizer hits constant walls. They don't quit. They see each obstacle as the material. That's Amor Fati, the discipline of action, using the frustration for the next step. And the big failures we see in leaders, they line up with a collapse of these same disciplines. An angry public outburst, that's a failure of the protocol for anger. Surrendering to what Seneca called a brief madness. A leader who gets isolated, paranoid, surrounded by yes men, they've stopped seeking wise counsel. The inner court of reason gets replaced by an echo chamber, chasing short-term popularity, making policy for tomorrow's headlines instead of the next generation. That's a failure of the view from above, confusing applause for substance. Epictetus was a former slave. His wisdom fits right into the modern news cycle. He said, if someone gave your body to a stranger, you'd be angry, but you hand your mind over to anyone who comes along. You let it be troubled. How many leaders do that now? Hand their peace of mind, their focus, to every trending topic, every critical tweet. The Stoic leader guards their attention. They use information to inform, not inflame. Their responses are measured. They don't run on the outrage cycle. This resilience shows up in unexpected places. A teacher in a tough school, every day practicing the discipline of assent. Refusing to see the immense challenge as an evil, seeing it as the material she's been given to shape. A nurse manager in a crisis, that's Sympatheia. Seeing each patient, each stressed staff member as part of one struggling whole. A software engineer pushing for ethical design, the discipline of action. Aligning work with the common good, even when it's less profitable. These are all applications, scaling the emperor's principles down to human-sized work. So think of a leader you admire, historical, local, a mentor, even a character from a story. Look at their actions through this lens. Which single discipline do you see? Is it their premeditation of challenges, their focus on duty over glory, their sense of connection to the people they serve? Finding that core principle, it turns their example into something more than inspiration. It becomes a practical blueprint, a piece of the same architecture that once held an empire steady. You have an empire not of land but of judgment, of action, of character. This is your province. Its borders are your sphere of control, your home, your work, your relationships, the conversations in your own mind. This is the territory you govern. And how you govern it, that determines everything. The Stoic framework wasn't just for marble palaces, it was for the human heart. Your province is the testing ground. So reframe the principles, the dichotomy of control, that's your charter. It defines your sovereignty. You are sovereign over your choices, your efforts, your character. You are not sovereign over events, over other people's opinions, over outcomes. Your inner citadel, that's the governor's residence, the fortified space where you retreat. To consult reason before you issue a decree, your duty to the common good, that's your policy. It asks how your choices affect everyone in your sphere. Your family, your colleagues, your community. Corruption doesn't start with a grand betrayal. It starts here, in the small, daily choices. the white lie to avoid a conversation. The credit you quietly take for a team's work, the resentment you nurse instead of addressing it, each one is a tiny fracture in the walls of your citadel. Epictetus gave a starting point. He said, if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish about external things. Do not wish to be thought to know anything. Start with a cup, he said. Practice not being disturbed if it breaks, then a piece of furniture, then your reputation. That's the training. Governing your reaction to a broken cup, that's how you learn to govern your reaction to a broken plan. A broken promise. If you cannot rule your province in matters of clay and wood, you will never rule it in matters of the heart. So what does this look like? It's the deliberate pause when your child frustrates you, that space between their action and your reaction. That's where you exercise your imperial power. The power to choose patience over anger. It's the moment at work you volunteer for the difficult, unglamorous task because it serves the project, not your resume. That's action for the common good of your team. It's the nightly review, just a minute where you ask yourself, where did I rule well today? And where did I let my province be governed by someone else's mood or my own irritation? Define the borders of your province today. Is it your morning routine, where you decide what seeds to plant in your mind before the world intrudes? Is it a specific relationship? One that requires more justice and less emotion? Is it your physical health, the stewardship of the body that houses your reason? Choose one area, just one. And within that border, apply your singular imperial power, the power of your choice with Stoic virtue. What one small, firm, virtuous decree will you issue to yourself? And then enforce with the quiet authority of a good ruler. The hidden framework was never just one secret. It was a whole operating system, built for the soul, for the pressure of command. We've walked through the core disciplines, the inner citadel, self-sovereignty, Amor Fati, that embrace, the duty to the common welfare, each one part of an architecture. It let a person sit at the pinnacle of power and still be fundamentally good. The potential for corruption was absolute. The Stoic answer wasn't more rules from outside. It was a deeper freedom built from inside, a freedom from mastering the only thing we ever truly control, our own character. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this aim. He said the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. Think only on things in line with your principles, things that can bear the full light of day. The universe is change. Our life is what our thoughts make it. True power, he suggests, is tranquility, a soul in harmony with its own nature and the wider world. That tranquility is the final foundation, unshakable. It's what remains when the external titles are stripped away. So as we leave this, a point of reflection. From this ancient framework, which single principle feels most alive for you now? Is it building your inner citadel through morning reflection, or the mental pivot of Amor Fati? Seeing your next obstacle as your assigned material, choose just one, carry it into the coming week, not as a burden but as a lens, a new way to see the challenges in your own sphere. And if you feel moved to, share in the comments which Stoic discipline is most challenging for you or most relevant to your life today. This isn't just about history. It's about building a modern community of practice, learning from each other as we tend to the governance of our own inner empires.